again here. There's a couple more things we got to see about the two witnesses. And I will grant authority to my two witnesses, and they will prophesy for 3.5 years. And so many people want to make this some strange Old Testament prophesying, thus says the Lord. But what does the book of Revelation tell us? What are these two witnesses? I can tell you what they're doing. We're going to learn right now what these two witnesses are going to be doing. We're going to see their message, their exact message, and what their work is. We already saw in the last one that in their preaching, teaching, death, resurrection, and rapture, it's all a type of, an image, a symbol of the fulfillment in them of the work of Christ that was they missed, that they were blinded to in the time that the Lord was in Israel and on the earth. But it says that they will prophesy for 3.5 years. What did the book of Revelation say about prophesying? Revelation 19:10. And John's here, and it says, and I fell at his feet. That John sees this angel, and he falls at his feet to worship him, and he said to me, do not do that. I am a fellow servant of yours and your brethren who hold the testimony of Yeshua. Worship God. And listen, saints, here we go. These two are going to be prophesying for the first 3.5 years of the tribulation. Here's what that means. For the testimony of Yeshua, and I'm using Yeshua here for sure because this is the Israelis. You're not going to have two born-again Israeli Christians speaking down there and calling the Lord an English translation Jesus. They're going to be using Yeshua. And it says here, for the testimony of Yeshua is the spirit of prophecy. So they're here prophesying for the first 3.5 years. It tells you right there what they're going to be prophesying about. Their prophecy is going to be for the testimony. Their prophesying is going to be a testimony of Yeshua. For the testimony of Yeshua is the spirit of prophecy. So they are going to be testifying to the Jews that have been blinded for over 2,000 years. The time of the Gentiles as these two are witnessing and prophesying and teaching for the first 3.5 years. The time of the Gentiles is coming to an end. At the midway point in their death, resurrection, and rapture, the Israelis will turn to Christ. This will cause the antichrist to hate them. He will go against them because he's going to say he's the God. He's the God they're to worship. But that is what they're prophesying. Their prophecy is the testimony of Yeshua. They're going to be prophesying, teaching, witnessing about Yeshua to the Jewish people for the first 3.5 years of the tribulation. And what else will they be saying? What will that involve? It's the same thing that the church of Laodicea, those that weren't ready, weren't watching, that go into the tribulation. They will have the same message. Of course, the church is going to be testifying about Jesus, about Yeshua. They're going to be witnessing about that during the first 3.5 years of the tribulation. That's why you see in chapter 7 that number that nobody can number, that angel shows John. They're the ones that come out of the tribulation. So anybody trying to tell you that Christians are not in the tribulation, Christians can't go into the tribulation, isn't even doing a basic read of the Bible. Because hundreds of millions of people, the church of Laodicea, those that weren't ready, weren't watching, weren't ready, their lamps weren't lit, they go into the tribulation. And they preach the gospel to every tongue, tribe, and nation around the entire earth. It's the Christians in each area, each country, preaching to their own people in their own language. And that's where that huge number comes from, Revelation chapter 7, that the angel told John, these are the ones that come out of the great tribulation. So the first thing these two witnesses are going to be doing is the same thing that the church is going to be doing for the first 3.5 years. They coincide. These are going to be doing the same thing. The Gentile church, for the last 3.5 years of the time of the Gentiles, are going to be testifying about the Lord. And they're going to be referring to him mostly as Jesus. The Jews are going to be preaching and testifying about Jesus to the Israelis. And they are certainly going to be calling him Yeshua. That was his name. That was what you would have heard if you were alive in his time, Yeshua. But what else are the Gentiles, for the last 3.5 years of the time of the Gentiles, and the two witnesses preaching, teaching in the first 3.5 years of the tribulation to the Israeli people? The message is the same. It's in Revelation chapter 14, beginning in verse 6. And I saw another angel. Remember what we've learned? If you haven't seen my other messages, anytime you see an angel in the book of Revelation, it's bringing you a message. They're not doing these things. They're bringing the saints a message from God. And I saw another angel flying in mid-heaven, having the eternal gospel to preach to those who live upon the earth, and to every nation and tribe and tongue and people. An angel ain't going to fly around the world and preach the gospel during the tribulation. That's silly. This is a message to God's people. Angels in the book of Revelation are bringing God's people a message. This is their message. They'll be preaching the eternal gospel to those who live upon the earth. The Christians that went into the tribulation will be doing this. As they're preparing themselves, they will have 3 messages to preach. The two witnesses will have the same 3 messages. Remember that. The Gentiles are going to be preaching and teaching these 3 messages throughout the first 3.5 years of the tribulation as they're preparing for the marriage supper of the Lamb. The two witnesses are going to be preaching these same 3 messages to the Jewish people for the first 3.5 years of the tribulation. And that first message is preaching the eternal gospel. Of course it's that message. And that's the testimony of Yeshua that we saw in Revelation 19:10. That's what the two witnesses are prophesying. That's what the church of Laodicea that goes into the tribulation, that's what they're preaching, teaching. Of course it would be. The eternal gospel they're preaching. And then in verse 8, Revelation 14:8, and another angel, another message from God. A second one followed, saying, Fallen, fallen is Babylon the Great, she who has made all the nations drink of the wine of the passion of her immorality. So the second message that the saints that go into the tribulation are preaching is that Babylon has fallen. And the second message the two witnesses are going to preach is that Babylon has fallen. And in Babylon falling, it's making way for the quick rise of the kingdom of the beast, and out of the kingdom of the beast will come the antichrist. So the first message the church in the first 3.5 years and the two witnesses will preach, of course, is the gospel. The second message that they're both going to preach is that Babylon has fallen and the results of that. And now, in verse 9, and another angel, now a third message for the church, for the saints in the tribulation, including the two witnesses. And another angel, a third one followed them, saying with a loud voice, If anyone worships the beast and his image, or receives a mark on his forehead or on his hand, he also will drink of the wine of the wrath of God, which is mixed in full strength in the cup of his anger, and he will be tormented with fire and brimstone in the presence of the holy angels and in the presence of the Lamb. So the third message that those who go into the tribulation and those that get saved in the tribulation of the Gentiles, the third message will be warning about that coming of the kingdom of the beast and the antichrist, and not to take their mark, not to worship them. The two witnesses, of course, will be preaching that same message, because the antichrist is going to Jerusalem. At the same time, the two witnesses are coming, like the Lord came to Jerusalem when he was crucified. The two witnesses are coming in that spirit of Elijah, that spirit of the living God, that spirit of Christ. They're coming to Jerusalem. And they will be slain. But the Antichrist is coming too. So of course, before they're slain, they're going to warn everybody that the Antichrist is coming. They're going to know the Bible better than we ever will. So of course they're going to tell him. That's why the Jews are going to reject the Antichrist and turn to the living Messiah. Because these two witnesses are going to be warning them that the Antichrist is coming, not the true Messiah. The anti-Messiah is coming, and he's going to go into that temple that the Jews have made, that temple made of stones, made of hands. God has a temple in heaven. That's the one that we're going to, but this one that they're building on earth, the Antichrist is going to come to that temple made by hands, made of stone, and the two witnesses are going to be warning the Israelis about that. And in their death, resurrection, and rapture, like it said, and the rest of them turn to the living God. They'll turn to God and reject the Antichrist. And as we've seen here, the Gentile church will be preaching the same three messages to the Gentile world leading up to the middle of the tribulation. Because those Gentiles that didn't go in the pre-tribulation rapture, they loved the world. They weren't ready. Their lamps weren't lit. They'll preach that first 3.5 years, but they'll be caught up in the middle of the tribulation at the exact same time the two witnesses are, or approximately that same time. It doesn't say exactly. And in the resurrection and rapture of the two witnesses, that spirit of Elijah is in them, will fall upon Israel. And Israel will be like Elijah. They will have more power than even the two witnesses had. And then the Gentile time, the time of the Gentiles will be over. And God will remove the blindness from the Israelis. And his spirit will be poured out upon them. And they will turn to the living Messiah to serve him and worship him and love him. But the Antichrist will hate them. He will come after them. He'll pursue them. He'll want to wipe them off the face of the earth. But we will return with the Lord just before the end of the tribulation and put an end to them, the Antichrist and the false prophet. But now, saints, we are to be ready, waiting, watching, our lamps lit, not loving the world and the things of the world. Don't you know what the world is? It's the kingdoms of the world. It's the leaders of the world. It's the stars, the musicians, the money makers, the rich people of the world. We're not to love those things. Sure, we're not to be out in sin. If you're just caught up in sin, you won't be ready. But we're not to love the world nor the things of the world. We're to repent and prepare the way of the Lord.